Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Max Verstappen wins the fastest race in the history of the Formula 1 World Championship, but the key drama came at the end of the Grand Prix. Again, Norris versus Piastri were fighting for big position in terms of championship points, and the drama at the end of the Grand Prix was exemplified by Max Verstappen's opinion on the matter. What do you think in the comments below? Plenty to get into. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's begin here. Max Verstappen stuck it on pole yesterday, and clearly this weekend they've made major progress. Now maybe, and this is true to a certain extent, Ferrari just don't have a good car. That is true this year. McLaren don't particularly suit this circuit with this year's car. Yeah, their tyre deg is still fantastic, as we saw as the Grand Prix went on, and big questions and debate about what the hell Pirelli are cooking up right now, it's got to be said. But also, their car doesn't really suit this type of track. They're pretty good at corners like the Lesmos, but the other corners where the McLaren is especially strong, it's not like a car that has massive weaknesses, but around Monza, with the more draggy nature of their car compared to others, McLaren I don't think were ever necessarily expecting to be super dominant this weekend. But clearly Red Bull have taken a step, and the understanding, it seems, has come from Max Verstappen himself, because apparently after yesterday's qualifying it was confirmed that Pierre Wache, this is interesting, the rumour has it, Pierre Wache, top technical guy at Red Bull, the team don't, well, let's say Verstappen's team don't really trust him. Jos Verstappen, those guys aren't convinced that Wache really knows what he's talking about. And Wache apparently said to Max, or the team, like, hey, we think we should put a bigger wing on, it's going to cost Max in qualifying. Max said, I don't know what you're talking about. I did this in Silverstone, I'm going to do it again. And that's why he said Pierre could relax over the radio. So that's what he did. He stuck it on pole, and Max said before qualifying, some people in the team, potentially Wache, still wanted to do something different with the setup. I said, no, we're not going to do that. A few people doubted the chosen setup, but I felt this is what we have to do. And Max also went on, there was other discussion, that the setup Max has chosen this weekend that led to this amazing result was rather unorthodox maybe compared to what the simulator said, and Helmut Marko even said that they used to use the simulator, now they don't, now they just use Max, and Max says what they're going to do, they do it. Marko says they're now using a bit more common sense with their setup, so it may be true that Verstappen has turned a corner. Technically he's not out of the championship fight, but it obviously would take a ton of DNFs and issues from McLaren, and the fact of the matter is that McLaren even today not having a 1-2, but they still scored a boatload of points obviously this weekend, so it's not like Max is back in the hunt, but it does feel like that they've kind of turned a corner. Not to say that's going to happen everywhere, but there probably will be other Grand Prix. It wasn't long ago that Max was like, I'm never going to win a Grand Prix again with this machine, but it turns out that it was possible, and it seems that they've kind of discovered something new with their setup on what this car needs that is giving Max the ability to, well, grab the race with both hands and take it all the way down. There was talk as well about the track records. Max set it yesterday, but he says, look, new asphalt, different curbs, the track's got faster, so difficult to compare different eras in that sense. But he also did say, give me that Mercedes from a couple of years back, and I may also do a pretty nice lap time in that one. But let's get on with the Grand Prix, because before the Grand Prix even started, Nico Hülkenberg had to retire the car. That was massively unfortunate for him, but it was a hydraulic issue. Jonathan Wheatley confirms. The lights are out and away we go. And can you believe it? Lando Norris got an absolutely fantastic launch off the line. He was already up alongside Max Verstappen, and, well, Max decided that he was just going to hold station and effectively force Norris into the grass. And this was pretty interesting, I'm not going to lie, because at this point where the wall is, Lando can't really do anything, right? Like, what's he meant to do? He's meant to back out and crash into Piastri behind him, or, you know, it was an interesting one anyway, because Max decided that he was going to hold station, and yeah, he was still probably marginally ahead, but as they go down, again, it was almost like Suzuka all over again when Norris finds himself on the grass. Pretty much half his car was on the grass at 200 miles an hour, and then Max pulled over to the left-hand side, Norris came off the grass. I thought Norris was going to maybe hit a big lock-up here, because off the grass, his tyres, bit of grass on them. I wondered if he was going to, hit the braking zone properly into turn one. But Norris, on the inside of turn one, goes nice and late on the brakes, gets the move done onto Max. And this was, a classic Verstappen turn one moment when, look, if Verstappen was on the inside, he would have done exactly the same thing, right? And that's what Norris did. Max even on the radio said, oh, Lando, he let off the brakes, right, intentionally to drive me off. it's like, well, even if he did, then that's racing, right? And Max obviously would have done it the other way around. Max realised his best attempt here was to go off the track, keep the position and just drive off and hope the stewards wouldn't care, but his team told him he probably had to give it back. And if you look at this screenshot, Norris is heavily on the inside here. It was his corner, and, Max had no right to stay on the track on the outside. So Max crosses over. Of course, he's given no room, but racing rules, turn one, Red Bull decided it was better to, force him to give the place back. Otherwise, Max probably would have been penalised for this. The other key note at the start was that Antonelli had a terrible one. He dropped quite a way down the order, so unfortunate for the Italian driver. The other note, of course, is Leclerc getting a mega start, and despite, if you look at this screenshot here, you wouldn't really expect Leclerc would have found a way to get this moved on Piastri, but that's exactly what he managed to do. Leclerc fires his way out of turn one with a lead over Oscar Piastri, and immediately this looked to be pretty big for Lando Norris, right? Because look at this. Piastri is now down in fourth. Norris is about to get the lead because Verstappen's going to have to give up the position. And it looked like it could be a really big day for Lando in the championship context. That, of course, changed very swiftly indeed because Oscar Piastri put on a sensational move around the outside of the first Lesmo on Leclerc. Leclerc's car was terrible in the corners. Piastri even said it after the race. He was like, damn, that guy had no speed in the corners. They had just gone full straight line speed merchant Ferrari this weekend. So, look, maybe the move was doable, but it was still a pretty decisive, again, move from Piastri. I just wonder, let's say the roles had been reversed and it was Norris in Piastri's position, would he have done the move around the outside of Leclerc into the first Lesmo? I don't know. It kind of reminded me of the move that Piastri did on Hamilton back in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix when, he just took a move in a spot we weren't really expecting it, right? And I think, Piastri lost points today in the championship, but every time he races, he gives me more reasons why he's probably going to be world champion this year. That was one of them. Then Norris was like, damn, this guy's an idiot. What's he doing? Put me in the grass, and then he just cut the corner. So, as always, Norris and Verstappen, especially now that Norris has the better car or the more competitive car, things get pretty spicy. So, look at this, right? 4 cars on screen, all fighting for the win. Piastri had so much more pace than Leclerc through the corners. It was pretty inevitable he was going to get back past through, but Verstappen gives up the lead to Norris at this moment, and Norris then takes the lead into the Roger chicane. Here he is on the left-hand side. And Leclerc gets back ahead of Piastri here with a great move into this chicane. So this cost Piastri a fair bit of time. He was now stuck behind Leclerc for a few laps. Verstappen relatively swiftly and frankly rather easily closed up on Norris and took the lead. And as soon as this happened, it was very evident that there was only one winner of this Grand Prix. Max Verstappen, not only did he have the fastest pace in qualifying, but he turned up in the race and had, by quite some way really, the fastest race car. This shouldn't have been too much of a surprise. I was listening to Verstappen on the grid walks before when they were interviewing him, and he said, yeah, I'm pretty confident. And when he says that, with 2 McLarens behind him, I think Verstappen probably knew that he should have it covered today, and that's exactly what he did. So, extremely impressive for Max, yet again, what a drive from him when the opportunity presented itself. But the drama from then became, okay, could Norris or Piastri potentially beat Verstappen on strategy or something, or how is it going to play out between the 2 McLarens? Because at this point, Norris is first, Piastri's fourth. It's looking pretty good for the guy who's second place in the championship. By lap 48, that was then a very different story indeed. So Max retakes the lead of the race. We wouldn't see too much more of him after that. And only a few laps in, we've got to talk a little bit about Ferrari. Charles was on lap 4, saying my rear tyres are cooked. Piastri got back past him. It didn't take him that long. And, Leclerc was being pretty aggressive. I think he locked him into turn 1 and, he cut the chicane and went on. It's interesting, this track, isn't it? Because there's a few situations where if you, I locked up at the corner, isn't that a shame? And then went straight on and actually kept position or kept lap time or whatever. And there's been obviously plenty of instances like this in the past. Here's Hamilton, by the way, got up into 8th place at this time. It wouldn't take long before he would make some serious progress in the field, which did eventually stall, at least in part, because on lap 6, Hamilton was getting told, all right, Lewis, it's been a good start, but it's time to start the lift and coast, right? We've got to prepare, we've got to protect the tyres, we've got to protect the floor, we've got to protect the engine, and all this type of classic Ferrari stuff. There was a bit of a note between Hamilton and Tsunoda at the start. That was then passed up relatively swiftly. Yuki was in the points. That would change, and we'll see some drama on that again in a second. It was, to be fair, despite being the quickest Grand Prix ever, relatively action-packed. This was Lance Stroll getting forced off the track by Esteban Ocon. We've seen this before. Hamilton and Piastri made contact here a couple of years ago. There's been a few moments on this run into the Roger chicane. Stroll gets basically forced off the track, has to actually correctly take to the runoff area here and goes around the bollard as you're meant to do. And Ocon got a 5-second penalty for that one, for forcing him off the track. Pretty interesting it was a 5 seconds, just because I thought, I don't think 5 seconds was unfair. I think it's pretty reasonable. But, we thought for a time that they were making pretty much all the penalties 10 seconds. Again today, stewarding inconsistencies were a key talking point. Lap 12, Hamilton's made big progress. He overtook Bortoleto. He did say on the radio that it was costing him a lot of tyre to get these moves done, but he made a good move on Alonso, made a good move on Bortoleto, felt at this point that Hamilton was probably going to find a way to 5th, at least in the Grand Prix, but of course that was really the maximum of what was achievable for Ferrari. And again, Brian Bozzi was on the radio to Leclerc saying you've got to increase the lift and coast on the tyres. Hamilton said the car's now oversteering all over the place. So it was just not going to be a good day again for the Tifosi. Verstappen already has a 5-second lead on Norris. Piastri is 6 seconds further back from that. And relatively swiftly here, it was a bit of a procession at the front of the field. This was a very interesting moment. Carlos Sainz locked up pretty heavily into the Roger chicane, and instead of taking to the yellow-lined runoff area as is intended, to effectively make sure that you don't gain any advantage coming around this side of the chicane, he just straight up slammed it all the way over the chicane and just continued on going, and clearly saved race time in the process. Now, this of course is on the race director's notes that you're meant to go this way, and Sainz did not. Now, if you are, let's say, in an instant with another car, a couple of years ago, Sainz and Leclerc had a lot of clashes at this exact corner. And if you're having clashes, you're both trying to make the corner and you can't make it because the other guy locks up, then it's impossible at that point to take to the runoff area, so it's kind of considered fair enough. But in this instance, I thought it was, I don't know why Sainz didn't just go around the bollard, because he easily could have done, but he decided not to, and they gave him a reprimand for this, like a warning, and I was a little bit intrigued by this. I think they could have considered a penalty here. I don't know if it's just because Sainz was all over them for what happened last weekend against Lawson. But yeah, it was interesting this is just a reprimand, because as Brundle rightly said in commentary, if this is just a reprimand, then on the final lap of the race, unless you're, going to overtake someone, but, let's say you're just about to hit a pit stop, you've got a big outlap to come in, and you just accidentally lock up into this chicane, go straight on, and save a bit of race time and take a reprimand for it, it's got to be worth it, right? And we know other tracks where this is possible. We've seen it happen, let's say, in Miami as well, where Verstappen crashed into the bollard. It's been noted that drivers, I missed the corner, right, to gain a bit of time. I think Piastri was playing that game a little bit earlier this year. So definitely something that the stewards need to think about. However much thinking they do, it is a matter for debate. This was Lando starting to spray some gravel onto the track here, and, there were a bit of sparks coming from his floor. I did wonder if he'd picked up any damage. Gasly did the same shortly afterwards. But on lap 21, this actually was Behrman getting a moved on Tsunoda, which was, so Yuki again had a pretty torrid time of things. Pretty big race for him, given that it looked like he was stronger this weekend. But again, in race pace, he's just nowhere near. Even in qualifying now, Tsunoda's getting within a couple of tenths, but his race pace is just absolutely not on the same planet as to what Max is doing. Then we have the Alonso show. So Alonso comes into the pits here. He actually played this so well. He broke so late to get right up behind Bortoleto, and then because Alonso is just so smart, he knew that the pit box meant that Bortoleto was going to get held, and anyway, Alonso takes advantage of it. He takes the position, but shortly afterwards, his suspension just breaks. For all that we've talked about the Aston Martin being a bit of a tank, that didn't happen this time. Sainz also wasn't very happy about Albon being effectively let past him at this moment. Albon went really long on that set of hard tyres, and that's a discussion we'll have in a second. So that was another talking point of the race. Alonso's suspension then just breaks. He came out of the Ascari chicane. He got very heavily on the curb, but no more on the curb than anyone else really got. And his front right suspension just failed. And that was it for him. So, look, Alonso says a lot about being the unluckiest driver in F1. You can't really see too far past it on some of this recent evidence. The poor guy, he was having a great race. He just pulled off a great move. And there we go, suspension failure out of the Grand Prix. Norris was wondering, could we go to the ends on a set of mediums and put on a set of softs? And this is a question which, frankly, should not be possible. Like, let's be honest here. The soft tyres, maybe, it should have been the C6 or whatever, and the step should have been even softer than it was for the Pirelli compounds this weekend. But the fact that the medium tyres could have done the whole Grand Prix today, yeah, Monza's not particularly heavy on tyres because a lot of straights, but still, I mean, come on, right? The fact that the mediums could easily have done the full race stint was probably not what we want to see, and it creates just races that could be far more entertaining than they actually are. But look at this, big procession at the front of the field. Norris was thinking, oh, okay, I could go to the ends. Then we got this Tsunoda versus Lawson crash. They were both going into the Roger chicane again. Lawson was on the outside of the corner. Yuki left him room, but Lawson had no right to the corner given the track positions. And okay, it was pretty aggressive in both men. Obviously, Yuki did not want to let him through because of reasons of pride and obviously trying to keep his seat and all that type of stuff. But Lawson really should have just yielded, I think. But he went for it anyway. He tries to stick around the outside. They made some contact. You might argue that Lawson should have been entitled to the space, but I think Yuki was entitled to defend in the way that he did. Yuki picked up floor damage, and that was his race over. So again, Lawson getting involved in some sort of instance, definitely a controversial one, I thought. It cooked both of their races in the end as well. So I think some questions on that will be asked internally within that team. Leclerc then goes for a pit stop. He was asked whether that was really the best thing to do, because it's not like they were under threat from behind. But in the end, it wouldn't have made much difference for the Ferrari. He actually gave it a pretty good go, Leclerc, to try and be in the conversation at the end of the Grand Prix. This was Russell making a couple of passes when he pitted for the hard tyres. Hamilton then made his pit stop, came out in 9th, so he had a bit of overtaking to do. But even Albon at this point had not yet pitted. Neither had Norris, neither had Piastri. But it was pretty clear on this lap that Verstappen was going to win this race. There was no way that the soft tyres were going to be that godlike, that the McLarens were going to make up that much time. This was also a very controversial one. So Sainz was, if I remember correctly, overtaking Behrman on the outside of the Roger chicane. Again, another instance here. Now, this was the line on the entry to the corner. Sainz was ahead, sure, but he wasn't a full car length ahead, and I don't know exactly what the rules are because they're a bit complicated on this, but you have to be on the outside, you have to be very significantly ahead. I almost thought it was like you had to be near enough rear axle to front axle to justify it being totally your quarter and having the space if you are overtaking on the outside. Let's not forget the racing rules definitely favour the driver on the inside. So yeah, Sainz was overtaking on the outside. He was clearly ahead, but I don't know, I expected that he had to at least leave some room to the guy on the inside. He didn't, they crashed, and Behrman probably stuck his nose in a bit where he maybe shouldn't have done or whatever. I think it was a racing incident, to be honest, but Behrman was given a 10-second penalty for this. So, yeah, definitely a debate on that, but again, right, whatever you think about Sainz, he has been involved in another collision 2 weekends in a row. This time he is not on the opposing end of it. But let's talk about the drama that unfolded at the end of the Grand Prix, because Norris Piastri, this was a question. At the end of that first stint, Norris had probably worked his tyres a bit harder earlier in the stint than Piastri had maybe, although that's a bit of a debate, I suppose. But whatever you think, Piastri was a bit quicker than Norris at the end of that stint. I mean, we were like 50 laps into these medium tyres. So Norris was struggling a bit. Piastri was closing in, a few tenths a lap on Lando at this point. So it was clear they had to box, and they were going to do it for the softs, because at that point, they might as well have done. So Lando was told, we're going to box this lap. Then Norris says, hang on a second, Leclerc, he didn't say this, but the implication was Leclerc is obviously pitted. He's trying to make the undercut happen. Do you want to pit the other car first? Meaning Piastri, right? Leave me out. Now, this is interesting because Lando, I would have expected him to just say, okay, yeah, box me, so then I don't have to worry about the undercut, right? Like, you bring me in now, I don't have to worry about Piastri undercutting me. But Lando wanted to say, well, we sure it makes most sense just to make sure that Piastri isn't vulnerable to Leclerc. The team probably should have just said, the undercut's not even a threat from Leclerc, let's just bring in Lando first anyway. But Lando, tried to say, look, bring in Oscar first, then bring me in. But I don't know, I think for Lando this was a very interesting decision because he was allowing, whatever happens with regard to Leclerc, he was allowing, by asking this, Piastri to close in on him. Whatever the case would have been, if even he was 3.5 seconds in front, if Piastri came in, there was no pit stop drama, then Piastri would have closed in on him anyway by 1.5 seconds, and it would have been more interesting. Maybe Norris wanted just the slightly fresher tyres on the final stint as well, but Norris called this. effectively Lando made the decision to let Piastri go first. That was Lando's call, effectively, was to say, I want to pit seconds. And whether for team reasons or for personal reasons, Lando made the choice, effectively. He was told, don't worry, Piastri isn't going to undercut you. You've got nothing to worry about. We'll make sure Piastri stays behind. You've done the work. You deserve to stay ahead. Then we get the pit stops. Piastri comes in at 1.9 seconds. Absolute bagger, insane stop. Norris comes in 4 seconds slower than that. And as we can see here, it was the front left wheel gun, man. I think he thought he'd done it. But then his mate taps him and is like, no, you've not actually tightened it up. Get back in there. And, well, he did it. And it was a very slow stop. So tough for Lando, like an incredible moment. And Norris comes out of the pits. This is the correct screenshot. And Piastri is told, look, you'll be racing Lando at pit exit. But of course, he wasn't racing him because at this point he was way ahead. So lots of drama as a result of this, and Piastri was then told to give the place back. And as Piastri says, give the place back because you messed up the pit stop. Basically, that's part of racing. It's pretty much what Piastri said, is that in the discussions they've had before, they, it seems, had made an agreement to McLaren, a papaya rule, if you want to call it that if there was a pit stop issue from the team side, that's just racing, you know? Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's me. On this case, it was Lando, and it was going to cost him, obviously, a 6-point swing in the championship. But no, they decided to ask Piastri to swap the positions back. Norris regained P2, and they were allowed to fight from there, but Norris just had more pace on that end of the lap, and Piastri had no way to compete and get it back. And look, did Norris deserve to finish ahead of Piastri this weekend? Sure, absolutely, on his performance. But, you know, bad luck sometimes plays a role, as it does in the Dutch Grand Prix, and it would have been a similar story here. So understandably, lots of reaction to this from the drivers. Max Verstappen basically was laughing at it, right? And said, can't believe it. Just because they had a slow stop, they're going to swap the guys back. What people are saying is, oh, it's woke nonsense, right? McLaren's been ruined by this. They're deciding a championship fight by some level of fairness or whatever you want to say. And they're asking their drivers to do things that are fundamentally against their racing instincts. Now, Norris, you can look at it two ways. He was being a good teammate by getting Piastri to pit first, sure. But equally, he made the call, right? He decided that he didn't want to pit stop first and he wanted to go seconds. So on some level, that was his decision. McLaren messes up his pit stop, then he's behind, and then he obviously wants the place back. Piastri was asked to give it back. Do I think this is fair in the context of Formula 1 in general? I think I'm more inclined to agree with Max. But in the specific context of McLaren, I actually think, it might be controversial, but I actually think that they did the right thing today. In light of what happened in Hungary last year, I think that's the keynote, right? Hungary last year, where Lando was asked to give up position back for Piastri so he could win his first Grand Prix, and the precedent that they set at that point, the way that the McLaren team have handled themselves over the last couple of seasons, I think led to this position where this was probably the right thing to do. Now, it's controversial, and certainly F1 teams of past and present wouldn't have gone down a route like this in the circumstance, but given where McLaren are and have been, I think that what they did was expected and probably the right thing in the context. But look, that's my opinion. McLaren say the clear intent was to ensure we wouldn't swap positions, then unfortunately the slow stop happens, and this is an example of us showing the values and principles that we hold at McLaren. So thoughts in the comment section below as always. The winner though was Max Verstappen. Max won from Lando, from Piastri. Leclerc missed out on the podium by 4 seconds. He gave it a good go. Hamilton couldn't catch up to Russell in the final stint. Albon did a great job to hold on for 7th. Antonelli got a 5-second penalty for forcing him off the track, so he dropped down to 9th. Bortoleto with another couple of points. Hadjar finishes in the points as well from the pit lane, so some notable results up and down the field. So very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.